My name is Brooke Giordano. I am a marriage and family therapist, and at Lincoln, I'm in my 16th year at Lincoln. I got my own hours here all those years ago, and I've stuck around for several good reasons, which puts me in a great position to be in this role because I can speak to all the goods and all the challenges as well. I'm here to represent Lincoln families. We are a community and school-based nonprofit, the hub in Oakland, and then we also are in every school out in Pittsburgh Unified School District as well. So we have locations for Alameda, Oakland locations, and also in Contra Costa County. Lincoln, Lincoln is an agency that started over 135 years ago. It was actually the first racially integrated orphanage in the Bay Area. And so it stems from a long history of community. And, in speaking on that, I can say that the mission and the focus of the work that we do is in an effort to interrupt the cycle of poverty and trauma in a way that we can help support and guide young people and their families toward whatever version of success that is for them. I think that's the most kind of concise version. The population served is severely under-resourced populations, I would say, primarily black and brown families, and many of which live below the poverty line, for sure. We do request that trainees are, or expected to work up to 24 hours a week. It is 2 entire full days in the school setting. Well, yeah, I guess I was thinking last year when we were shelter in place, so it was telehealth, but everybody's back in person now. And yeah, they are basically providing direct individual therapy and also some group experience. They are receiving both 1 hour of individual supervision and 2 hours of group supervision. We have a very strong supervision focused values. We really feel like everyone, even people who aren't clinical, receive supervision at the agency all the way through all the levels of wherever everybody is, because it's just such impactful work and people need a place to put it. So they also receive just a lot of support and supervision. We learned pretty early on that it is a paperwork heavy traineeship, primarily because we are Medi-Cal funded. So there's a significant amount of paperwork involved, but I think those who are interested in looking or working for under-resourced communities are going to, it's a very valuable skill to be able to manage and navigate paperwork, or Medi-Cal paperwork rather, with a year to practice and a lot of support, because it's a very steep learning curve. So there is a lot of expectation around meaningful assessments and treatment plans, not just getting through the paperwork, but knowing that these are documents that people are going to read and they represent real human beings. And we want to make sure that they are represented in a strengths-based way everywhere where we have an impact on how they might impact someone else. So the referral process for us is first. Typically kids, in our elementary setting will pop up through behaviors or various things that show up behaviorally, I would say. Whereas in high school, there's a little bit more, or the older grades, there's a little bit more self-referring. But basically, when those kids pop up, they get put into what typically care team meetings or class team meetings is what most students' names are going through, which is usually a various group of players that sort of represent the school and mental health and, a number of sort of angles or perspectives of sort of who needs support and which program here at the school makes the most sense for this person, for example. And most of our locations, we're the mental health resource. So then we would receive the name of that person based on their referral criteria. The school would somehow reach out to that family to let them know that we would be calling, and then we reach out to initiate services and just see if there's any interest. And then the assessment process, we only actually have 30 days for an assessment and treatment plan because of county guidelines to, I guess, officially call it assessment. I feel like that's just a parameter in many ways that we have to go by as far as the paperwork, but I feel like we're in assessment for quite a long time. I feel like it's a difficult, 30 days is a difficult time to say you're done with an assessment. So I would say as far as paperwork goes, we are under pretty strict guidelines, and there are some, I don't want to scare people away when I say this even in interviews, but there are some big, guideline or deadlines and things that, matter because of insurance and coverage and things like that. And so things have to get done in the county on some, the paperwork documentation is really important to be on top of, that takes some organization and some real ability to sort of navigate timelines because those deadlines are pretty important for the services to be provided. Our trainees, and I tend to talk about this a lot as well in interviews, is that I know that there are BBS requirements and various pressures around the numbers of hours that people have to end up with at the end of the year. And while I do my very best, and I would say nearly every time we've had, everybody reach the amount of hours they need, we are really focused more on the quality of the provision of services rather than giving you a whole bunch of clients, sort of like just to get your hours. It's a ramp up process, basically. So we actually only work their way up to about 5 or 6 clients total that they work with. There's often also group work, and they're of course doing face-to-face work with parents and with collaborating parties that are in support of that student, and some family work from time to time and those kinds of things. But it's not going to be, a 12-person caseload and you're sort of out there sort of figuring it out on your own. This is a lot of training and a lot of meaningful work that brings up things for the trainee also. And we want trainees to have a place to put, their own transference and their own, what it kicks up for them. This is a time of great learning about the art of therapy, but it's also a real deep personal exploration too about where your own stuff is and what comes up for you still. And we really want to provide and create space for trainees to work through some of that in a space that feels safe and trusting. And that takes time. And also the parallel process of that with kids is we want those relationships to be supported and navigated and managed and held in a really contained way. So yeah, I think my point being that we limit pretty much, depending on the trainee, about 6 clients being the most that they reach. Supervision is honestly the reason why I've stayed so long at Lincoln, I think. I think that, in fact, again, in my interviews with trainees, I will often encourage them, no matter where they end up You know, try to meet with the person who will be your supervisor, because that relationship is so important. I really look at supervision, and I can only speak for myself, but I look at supervision as a place where I want someone to come and be able to allow all the parts of who they are, you know, as much as they feel comfortable sharing, so that they can evolve and grow as clinicians. And then, but I also want it to be a space where they feel like they can walk out and I can do this. You know, I want it to be a soft place to fall, but also somewhere that they're going to leave like, okay, and I got it, you know. I would say more generally, I think supervision, as does the agency, we come from a trauma-informed, attachment-based in the way that we provide support for our clients. And then I think that we're also really trying to support and help our staff and trainees navigate their own growth in their work so they don't burn out, right? So this work is so hard to do day in and day out without that. So we also implement vital plans where we can support trainees and staff in their own commitment to their own well-being and health. And, you know, self-care is a big part of every individual and group supervision too. How are you remembering to care for yourself? You know, this is hard work, but it's also heart work. And, you know, we have to find ways to, you know, process it. And oftentimes I think the people who end up in this line of work are people that are really good at doing that for others, but not always for themselves. And so we make a real point of making sure that those things are being addressed in supervision also. We also provide what's called cross supervision, which basically just means that we really try to avoid having the same person be the individual supervisor as the group supervisor. We really want, you know, more people to call on as sort of a support, but also just different perspectives, different ways of training, different way, you know, different styles. So we really try to make sure that the individual supervisor is different from the group supervisor. So that's another focus that we have too. Most trainees end up telling me that it's more than they ever thought they would need, but it you know, we do a lot of training. Our onboarding is significant. I feel like, again, there's sort of a bad rap about traineeships out in the sort of general world that, you know, you're sort of, I do get this sense of that trainees tend to feel like they're sort of thrown out there to like do it on their own a little bit. And I don't know, maybe it's just my sort of mama bear sort of nature in the way that I am, but I really just feel like it's so important to have like a container, you know, especially as a trainee. It's a lot of balls in the air is really sort of how I picture it, you know, like there's so many balls in the air during that trainee year. And I just really focus on trying to create a foundation that feels safe, because that's where the growth will start from. And also the discomfort, right? We invite them to get really vulnerable. A lot of times people in grad school and at this level of their education or a second career or wherever they're at, you know, they're typically, they're ready to, they're the smartest one in the room, or they're used to knowing exactly what they're doing, and they're used to getting great grades. And all of a sudden they're in this really vulnerable, I don't know what I'm doing place. And it's a very vulnerable place to have to be. And so it's hard to sit in that without you're doing it with someone who feels safe across from you. So it really is just a very big part of who we are, is making sure that that onboarding, while a lot, is really foundational. So we actually do nearly a month of training off and on. We have a process that happens typically in the early part of the summer, where there's sort of a registration phase and transcripts and fingerprinting and the background checks and all the normal stuff that you would do at any placement. And then Typically, the very first week of August is a full week of what's called new hire orientation. And that would be attended by anyone, not just trainees, who are coming to Lincoln, just so that they can learn about the philosophy, the values, the principles. Our CEO comes in and introduces themselves and talks through like who we are. And they also get their iPhone and laptop where, so they're issuing all of these various things during this week. So it's a little more general. And then the next week is usually approximately 3 full days, depending on the day and just whether we're in a pandemic or not, or all of those things, is we do a school-based services training. So it's kind of a little bit more, kind of gearing in a little bit, and it's a little bit more, it splits apart an agency that has 16 programs. We kind of split into like, school-based and community-based, and we'll come back. And so it's all just people who are doing school-based. So it'll be like them meeting the different schools, the teams at the different schools and the different supervisors. So it's a little bit more of a personal experience where they're learning about what's going on in the schools, what are the culture in the schools, how do I write a incident report, what are the new laws around, who knows. And then the final 3 days is about 3 days with me and or one of my partners, where we spend a good 2 to 3 days just talking about what it means to be a trainee. How do I fit in here? What does all of this mean? Like, what am I doing? And I keep hearing, and they've now heard all of these things and all the stuff that people are saying, and it's just, without a client or ever having done it before, it's a lot to take in. So I really try to take a few days where we just really try to sit in what it all means and really slow it down. And usually we provide a pretty exhaustive manual, which we provide trainees so that they can have for reference as well. And then the training continues. There's also a training series. It's a weekly didactic training series that trainees attend every Friday from 1 to 3 on topical things like grief. It's like more of an in-depth look at various things. I used to teach one like how to talk to parents, or drugs and alcohol, what's going on right now. But also things like CBT and, like mini trainings on various things, emotional intelligence. And that runs the course of the entire year. I'm always leaning into, I feel like something that's been abundantly clear, somebody who's really proactive. I feel like you can't really be successful in a school setting if you're more of a reactive person, like, oh, well, what do I do now? I feel like it takes a lot of sort of thinking ahead of what might happen if this happens, or what should I be thinking about next? What comes next? And I don't necessarily know that all trainees can do that because they don't know what to think of next per se, but someone who's curious, like what's going to happen if, or what should I do when, or, and also somebody who has some pretty decent time management skills. Again, I think that a lot of trainees are also holding another job or are supporting a family member at home, or, all the other balls that are in the air. And I think that there's a way in which you have to, figure out how to do all that. The most challenging part is usually the documentation, paperwork. It's not that it's hard, it's just that it is something that you have to write very objectively, and there's just a little bit of a flip in the way that there's just a lot of it. I don't know, it depends on if you're familiar with Medi-Cal paperwork or not. If it's something you went through as a kid yourself, you're aware that it's very redundant, and there's lots of forms that are always needing to be filled out and signed. So there's just a lot of steps. but also an invaluable tool in working with the communities with which we're in, and just such a cool experience to have the opportunity to learn it in a training setting, when rather than being sort of put into it once you're an associate or something, and now all of a sudden you have 20 cases and you have to figure it out. It's just it's a neat, slower process, I'd say. I feel like I do tend to try to speak on what I think the most successful trainees bring, which I think I've already mentioned. I think the most important thing that maybe didn't get mentioned is the work that we are doing as an agency, as co-workers, but also definitely within the work that we do in really addressing issues of systemic racism and bias, and how our differences are impacting us with one another and in the work that we do. Again, speaking for myself, I'm a white woman serving a whole lot of black and brown people. And there is something important in there to be talking about. And it's also positional power and, all of these things that are in the room already. And so it's a big part of what we do in our training with our trainees is how to address that as a clinician in a room with somebody who's different than you. But also how to address it in your peer relationships with colleagues and peers, so there is a real commitment to, and a lot of, I think, in-depth work on addressing those issues, learning and unlearning in order to show up for these families in a way that they deserve.